All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about what might just be one of the most important relationships shaping our world right now, the partnership between India and Japan. You've got two of Asia's biggest democracies getting closer than ever before. And folks, this is a dynamic that could seriously define the rest of the 21st century.
So, this is the big question, right? In a world that feels like it's changing faster every day, why are these two nations suddenly so important to each other? It's about so much more than just trade or a shared history. There's a deep strategic alignment happening here, and it's sending ripples all across the Indo Pacific. So, we really have to ask why now? And what does it mean for everyone else? So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the current geopolitical chessboard. Then, we'll rewind and look at the deep historical roots. After that, we'll follow the money and see how their economies and militaries are getting tied together. But we won't ignore the bumps in the road. We'll cover the challenges too. And finally, we'll look ahead to how this powerhouse duo plans to write the next chapter for Asia. Okay, first things first, the new Indo-Pacific equation. To get why this partnership is buzzing, you have to get the context. The entire region is in flux, and both New Delhi and Tokyo see the landscape shifting under their feet. They've looked around and decided that the best way to navigate these choppy waters is together. You know, official language can be a bit dry, but this phrase here, special, strategic, and global partnership, is a really big deal. Those words, special and global, aren't just thrown around. They're reserved for a country's absolute closest, most trusted friends. It's a signal that this is about way more than just regional stuff. It's a pact with worldwide implications, all aimed at keeping the peace. The best way to think about this is like two giant puzzle pieces that were just made to fit together. You've got India's Act East policy, which is all about deepening ties with its eastern neighbors, and then you have Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. On their own, they're powerful ideas, but when you click them together, you get this perfectly aligned, seamless strategy for the entire region. Now, you might think this is all a very recent thing, but this modern-day alliance didn't just pop up out of nowhere. To really get the level of trust between them today, you've got to look back. The roots of this thing go deep, built on centuries of cultural connections and just plain old goodwill.
I mean, we're talking about a spiritual connection through Buddhism that started way back in the 6th century. But let's fast forward a bit. After World War II, in 1952, India did something incredible. It waived all war reparation claims against Japan. That was a huge gesture of friendship, and it's something that's still remembered in Japan today. And just look at the timeline since 2000. The relationship has been upgraded not once, but twice. That's like hitting the turbo button on a partnership.
All right, let's follow the money, because a huge part of this story is the economic engine that's driving it forward. This is where the partnership gets really tangible, with massive flows of Japanese cash and tech literally changing the landscape of India. Just look at that number, 10 trillion yen. That's about 65 billion US dollars. Japan had an earlier investment target, they hit it, and then they decided to literally double down. This isn't just a simple investment. It's a massive, massive vote of confidence in where India's headed. It's Japan saying, we are all in for the long haul.
But investment is only one side of the coin. When we look at trade, the picture gets a little more complicated. The total is a healthy $25 billion, sure, but look at the breakdown. There's a pretty big imbalance here. Basically, India buys a lot more high-tech stuff from Japan than it sells back to them, and that creates a trade deficit. It's a point of friction, and we'll come back to it.
And this is where you can literally see that Japanese money at work on the ground. Japan is India's #1 source for what's called Official Development Assistance, or ODA. Think of it as government-to-government funding for huge nation-building projects. We're talking about absolute game changers, like the famous bullet train, the massive Delhi metro, and new freight corridors that are basically rewriting the map of India. Okay, so we've talked about money. Now let's talk about military might. Because running parallel to that economic boom is the rise of a powerful security shield. Because they share a lot of the same worries in the Indo-Pacific, their defense relationship has absolutely skyrocketed. The two countries are now training together constantly, on the sea, on land, and in the air. And this isn't just for photo ops. It's all about building something called interoperability. It's a fancy word, but it just means making sure their troops, their ships, and their planes can all work together seamlessly, as if they were one force. That's a sign of a really mature defense relationship. And then there's this thing called ASA,
It sounds technical, but trust me, this is a huge deal. Put simply, it means an Indian warship can pull into a Japanese base for fuel, or a Japanese plane can land in an Indian airfield for repairs. It basically lets them share military gas stations and workshops. It dramatically increases how far and how long both of their militaries can operate, and that's a pact you only sign with your very closest allies.
But if you want the single best example of this new level of trust, it's this right here. The deal to co-develop this unicorn mast, it's a super advanced stealth antenna for warships, is a total game changer. Japan has always been extremely careful about sharing its sensitive military tech. The fact that they aren't just selling it to India, but are building it with India, well, that just speaks volumes.
Okay, but let's be real. No partnership is perfect. And to get the full story, we have to look at the hurdles, the friction points that India and Japan have to get over if this relationship is going to reach its full potential.
So, remember that massive 10 trillion yen investment target? It's impressive for sure, but this chart puts it into perspective. In 2024, the countries in Southeast Asia as a group still pulled in way more Japanese investment than India did. So the takeaway here is, while India is definitely a priority for Japan, it's not the only game in town. The competition for that capital is fierce. And it's not just about economics. They don't always see eye to eye on big global issues. Take the war in Ukraine. Japan has been right there with its G7 allies, putting tough sanctions on Russia. India, on the other hand, has maintained its traditional policy of strategic neutrality. It shows that even though they're aligned in their own backyard, their global views can sometimes differ.
And then you've got the more day-to-day nitty-gritty problems. There's that trade deficit we talked about earlier. There are the frustrating bureaucratic delays that can slow down some of those huge infrastructure projects. And honestly, for two countries that are so close strategically, there's surprisingly little connection between their regular people. Not enough tourism, not enough student exchanges. These are real issues they need to work on. So, with a clear view of the incredible potential on one hand and the real-world challenges on the other, what's next? What's the blueprint for this partnership to actually live up to its very lofty goal of shaping the next century in Asia?
Well, the roadmap from here is pretty clear, and it tackles those challenges head on. First, they need to take another look at their big trade deal to try and fix that imbalance. Second, they have to find ways to cut through the red tape and speed up those flagship projects. And maybe most importantly, they need to double down on tech and defense, moving from just buying and selling to actually creating and building cutting-edge stuff together. And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the grand ambition. The goal isn't just for India and Japan to help each other. The idea is for their partnership to become a stabilizing anchor for the entire region, a broader Asia that's peaceful and prosperous. They want to be the steadying force in a pretty turbulent part of the world. So we end up right back where we started, but hopefully with a much deeper understanding. We've seen the ancient roots, the modern economic and security bonds, and the very real challenges they face. The potential here is absolutely immense, but the final question still hangs in the air. Can this partnership of giants truly steer the future of the most dynamic continent on the planet? Well, the stage is set, and that's something we're all going to be watching very closely.